So good morning, everybody. My name is Zipporah Berman, and I'm the chair of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. I'm from the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam First Nations in Vancouver, Canada, and it's so great to be with all of you today. On behalf of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, I want to welcome you to our Stockholm+50 Pre-Day event. The Fossil Fuel Treaty is a new and bold proposal being advanced by hundreds, in fact, of civil society leaders, 101 Nobel laureates, including the Dalai Lama, close to 3,000 scientists and academics. 50 local governments have now passed motions endorsing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Parliamentarians from many countries around the world, youth and Indigenous leaders. Support for the Fossil Fuel Treaty idea is growing. We're so excited to have so many of you who have been working on it here in this room today to deepen the conversation. I'd like to thank our co-hosts of this event, the Nordic Council and the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, who welcome you as well. The Nordic Council is the Nordic Parliament consisting of 5 countries and 3 autonomous regions. Combating climate change is one of the main strategic focus areas of the Nordic Council. The Nordic Council is interested in contributing to global dialogue and often takes a role in facilitating dialogue on globally important issues. The Stanley Center's mission is to catalyze a just and sustainable solutions to critical issues of peace and security by driving policy progress, advancing effective global governance, and advocating for collective action. We're very grateful to see here today ministers, ambassadors, members of parliament, civil society organizations, academics, youth and Indigenous leaders, and so many others. We're excited to see people from around the globe who all care so much about the fate of humanity and the planet we live on, and who are willing to stand up and address the risks of oil, gas, and coal phase-out, those risks pose to our survival, let alone our well-being. It's truly wonderful to be with you here today in person, given the last 2 years that were so difficult for us all due to COVID. It's a thrill to be in person, but we also know that it's still with us. So we do ask you to respect the protocols here in Stockholm and take care of yourself and one another. So why are we here this week in Stockholm? 50 years ago, the first international conference on the environment was held here in Stockholm, which led to the Sustainable Development Agenda. And in the 50 years since, there have been major moments of international cooperation, significant. Major moments to manage the threats to our planet, from the nuclear ban treaty to global cooperation to save the ozone, to earlier this month, when the UN decided to create the world's first global plastics treaty. Yet, in those 50 years, governments have failed to address the top threat to our climate, our biodiversity, to human health and water: fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally from air pollution. And while climate policy and climate solutions, we all know in this room, is complicated, what's not complicated is that 86% of the CO2 emissions trapped in our atmosphere from the last decade come from 3 products: oil, gas, and coal. Despite the very clear science that we need to end expansion and wind down fossil fuel production and emissions in order to ensure climate and economic stability, we know from the amazing work of the United Nations Environment Program, IASD, and Stockholm Environment Institute, who are all here today, that we are on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal in the next decade than the world can safely burn, or it will burn us. As heat waves and fires and floods sweep our planet, it's critical that we face this stark reality. Let me say it again. We are on track to produce more than double the fossil fuels than we can burn and still meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. We need to move away from oil, gas, and coal to protect us, to deliver security and prosperity, and we need to do this in a way that leaves no worker, communities, or countries behind. For decades, our governments have been negotiating emissions reductions. Who gets to pollute and how much? But behind our backs, the fossil fuel industry has been growing production. And we desperately need new global agreements and international cooperation on how much we produce and who produces it. We can no longer allow the world's financial, political, intellectual capital to be focusing on digging up stuff that we know we can't use and is poisoning us. So today we're going to discuss how we can work together to realize a global, clean, fair, and fast energy transition. We're going to hear from a diversity of perspectives, the amazing people who have recognized and risen to this challenge to address the risks associated with oil, gas, and coal. This morning, we hosted a breakfast meeting of more than 25 policymakers from around the world who attended to hear and discuss the need for international cooperation, new ideas of what we can do together. And now we're delighted to open this event to all of you to explore today how we can tackle the global threat of fossil fuels together. So to set the scene for us today, we're delighted that the Honorable Bob Loughman, Prime Minister of Vanuatu, has recorded a video message for us. The Prime Minister's ambassador is with us today. Welcome. And the Prime Minister sends his apologies that he was unable to join us in person, but he sent this message.
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from the government and the people of the Republic of Vanuatu. I welcome today's discussion on the bold new proposal of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty as a complement to the Paris Agreement. Vanuatu supports any pathways that leads to more international climate cooperation and to getting off the addiction to oil, gas, and coal. The science is clear. There can be no further expansion of new fossil fuel projects of any kind, and we must see sustained, radical, and socially just cuts to production now and not later. It is acceptable that while states make more ambitious commitments on climate crisis, the dirty fuel industry has been working to extract and supply more fossil fuels than we ever be used. Overproduction will take us to even greater levels of ecological disaster and human suffering. The world must at all costs avoid exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius, which for Vanuatu would undermine the fundamental human rights of people who are not responsible for climate crisis. Let me be clear, 1.5 degrees is not the goal, but the human rights tragedy that can only be addressed by moving far away from all dirty and planet-killing fossil fuels. I am dismayed that emissions continue to increase since the Paris Agreement 6 years ago. The Glasgow Pact finally references coal and fossil fuel subsidies, but every day new fossil fuel projects are being approved and logging us into more severe loss and damage. The current aggression against Ukraine further underscores the need to reduce our dependence on the fossil fuel system as well as the military conflict it causes. Fossil fuels are weapons, and we are living the destruction. This treaty proposal offers a missing legal mechanism to bolster ambition and to bring climate justice into decision-making. Those with the capacities, technologies, resources, and historical responsibilities must be first movers, giving more time and support to developing nations as we strive to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Today's treaty discussion is timely. Tomorrow, the world's environment ministers will meet at Stockholm+50 to consider a range of economic, social, and legal mechanisms to protect our environment. We will commemorate 50 years since the first International UN Summit on the environment. The UN is an essential mechanism to address global challenges, and Vanuatu strongly believes that the entire UN system must be fully engaged in addressing the climate crisis. Nearly all UN bodies have weighed into this issue, with the exception of the International Court of Justice. The ICJ is able to provide advisory opinions that give much-needed clarity on how states work together on complex global challenges like climate change. This is a context in which Vanuatu will ask the members of the United Nations General Assembly to vote with us to request the International Court of Justice to clarify the legal obligation of states to protect human rights and environment from climate change. Let me be clear, this is not a court case. Vanuatu does not seek to assign blame. This is a campaign for the world's most vulnerable and humanity and our collective future. This is a campaign about what we must save, not what has been lost. This is a campaign to build ambition, not division. This is a campaign to uplift the goals of the Paris Agreement. This is a campaign for the young generations' call for justice. Vanuatu counts on your support for our ICJ resolution at the UN General Assembly this year. Just like you count on our support for new ambitious proposals to keep fossil fuels in the ground forever. Excellencies, please allow me to conclude by wishing you successful deliberations on the proposed fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Thank you for the work you are doing to free the world of fossil fuels and protect the people who are at the heart of climate suffering. Thank you, Dumas. God bless you all.
Remarkable. The Prime Minister covered a lot of ground, noting near the end that he talks about both their work on the ICJ and the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Campaign as campaigns for younger generations to call for justice. It's an honor today to have Elizabeth Wathuti and Vanessa Nakate with us for our opening plenary session. I'd like to invite you to join me on the stage. We'll first hear from Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a Kenyan climate activist. She's a Green Climate Fund youth champion and the founder of the Green Generation Initiative.
Thank you. We all know that the consequences of climate inaction have continued to be so disastrous for communities around the world. But most importantly, the humanitarian crisis, especially in the Horn of Africa, has continued to worsen. And right now, over 3 million of my fellow Kenyans are facing climate-related starvation, and also over 20 million people in neighboring countries across the Horn of Africa. And this is because of a record-breaking drought that has seen consecutive rainy seasons fail. For the past few weeks of this month, I have spent my time visiting communities who are impacted by this drought. And one such community is a community in Wajir County, which is northeastern part of Kenya. And what I saw with my own eyes was a heartbreaking example of how the food, nature, and climate crisis has continued to devastate communities. I saw with my own eyes hungry and desperate people who are losing hope for their future. I saw with my own eyes dead and dying livestock, and these are hundreds of carcasses of goats and cows lying on the roads, and they belong to a community whose 80% of livelihoods directly depend on this livestock. I also saw and heard from parents and women who have had to pull their children out of school because they do not have any income left to be able to support their children with school fees. Because again, the livestock is what they depend on each and every day. And for the remaining ones that they do not even have a good capacity, or even they're not in good health to even be able to sell them to get that income. And some of them have had to pull children, and most of them being girls, out of school. And what these girls are left to do is to spend the whole day taking care of the remaining livestock in their homestead. So it's true that the climate crisis is impacting communities, and for most of them, they're not waiting for the impacts to hit in the future. They also told me that all they have left right now to lean on is their faith. They do not know that our deadly reliance on fossil fuels is costing them their lives and their livelihoods. And they also do not know that we have spent the past years, and so many years in the past, talking about what we will do and making pledges and commitments that we end up not meeting. And at the end of the day, we end up making their lives more unbearable because they are the ones who are on the receiving end of this crisis despite having least contributed. But most importantly, I saw fighters. I saw communities who are willing to do everything that they can to find solutions for themselves, despite the fact that they still continue to be greatly impacted. And for this particular community, they tried everything. They have tried everything, including farming, but still the rains continue to fail. And this means that they are not able to still meet their needs every day because the climate crisis is still impacting them. So it's true, some of the impacts of the climate crisis defy human adaptation. And so we have to make sure that we are acting faster enough to save the lives and livelihoods of communities like those in Wajir County. And while this is happening, clear and concrete steps are still not being taken to turn things around, because we have spent so many years still not taking the action, but promising to take the action. This is an interconnected food, nature, and climate crisis, and what we must do is to not treat this crisis in silos, but to actually address them equally at the same time. because also we are not going to meet any climate targets without nature. So we have to remember that these crises are all interconnected. And delivery and accountability are very crucial because we have been here before with pledges made and not met. And with every delay of action, we continue to devastate communities that have almost nothing to do with this crisis. And so the most important thing here is the fact that we need to actually move with urgency and remember that this is a human problem that calls for us to take it in our hearts and to also in our minds that there are people who are on the front lines. And we know that we have to break our deadly reliance on fossil fuels and also invest massively on a clean energy future. And we also have to transform our global food systems and ensure that we are protecting and massively restoring our ecosystems, because it's one thing to restore the ecosystems, but it's another to continue to subsidize the destruction of nature. We have to make sure that all our remaining ecosystems continue to stay intact if we are to save all of humanity, in addition to stopping the investments in fossil fuels. And countries also have to raise their ambition to limit warming to 1.5 degrees and assist others to meet this challenge by mobilizing finance and resources. So this is about humanity, this is about lives, this is about livelihoods that are in balance. And if we have to make sure that we are saving these lives and livelihoods, this will have to be about action. Because again, every delay in action is causing these communities that I've mentioned, like those in Wajir County, to continue be on the receiving end. And that is not climate justice. Climate justice is when women will not have to walk for long distances to look for food, water, and firewood for their families. Climate justice is when communities whose 80% of livelihoods will not have to sit down and feel desperate about a future that they do not have any hope for left at the end of the day. So we have to make sure that it's about action and not words. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your experiences with us, both the challenges and indeed the horror, but also the leadership and inspiration from communities, and your very succinct leadership and prescriptions for moving forward. Vanessa Nakate was Uganda's first Fridays for the Future climate activist and is the founder of the Rise Up climate movement. Vanessa, I will never forget when you famously said, coming from the tar sands, I come from Canada, when you famously said for the first time, we can't drink oil, I felt like you shifted the reality of the narrative and the global debate. We're so honored to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much. We are gathered here in Stockholm as the United Nations marks 50 years since the 1972 United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, which made the environment a pressing global issue for the first time. 50 years. I am 25 years old. 50 years is twice my lifetime. For half a century, we have been trying to make the environment a pressing global issue. I want us to sit with that quietly for a moment and take that in. 50 years, half a century, and what have we achieved? Leaders continue to flock to summits like this one that will begin here in Stockholm tomorrow. At Stockholm+50, government and business leaders will make fancy speeches and more promises to take action. Then they will leave. And shortly thereafter, their commitments will be forgotten or broken or become politically impracticable. Or more to the point, back in their capitals, their commitments will be viewed as unprofitable, and emissions will continue to go up. And as a result of emission continuing to rise, extreme weather events will become more likely and more ferocious, and stronger and more frequent storms, droughts, landslides, wildfires, and floods will devastate communities around the world, especially in climate-vulnerable places in the global south, like where I live in Kampala, Uganda. And people will suffer, and people will die. People are already suffering. People are already dying. So the question then is why? Why 50 years on, with all of these brilliant and determined people here and all around the world who are doing everything they can to make the environment a pressing global issue, are we still in the same situation? Or to be more accurate, as the IPCC desperately tries to warn, why are we in a much worse situation? 50 years ago, the data and evidence was already piling up. 50 years ago, the scientists already knew that greenhouse gases from the burning of fossil fuels would destabilize our climate and threaten the health and well-being of millions of people. And soon thereafter, the politicians were warned by the scientists. So why have we made so little progress? Simply put, things don't change because the powers that be, the big coal, oil, and gas corporations and their complicit bankers want to make as much profit as possible for as long as they possibly can. That's it. Those in power have for 50 years put profit before people. It's quite literally business as usual. It has been 50 years of profit before people. If we are to have a chance of meeting the so-called triple planetary crisis of climate, nature, and pollution, that has to change. Fossil fuels are a unique driver of the triple crisis. Fossil fuels are the biggest source of CO2. Fossil fuels drive the extinction crisis through climate impacts. And fossil fuels are a significant source of plastics and toxic air pollution crisis. Fossil fuels undermine every single sustainable development goal. The IPCC, an ever-growing number of economists and faith leaders, and even the IEA are all very clear. We must end finance for all new fossil fuels, that is coal, oil, and gas, immediately. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says, investing in new fossil fuels infrastructure is moral and economic madness. Fossil fuels are killing us, and clean energy saves lives. The leaders who come to Stockholm+50 must end all finance for new fossil fuel development and take urgent action to immediately and massively scale up funding for renewable energy. Funding for renewable energy is especially needed in the global south, where countries urgently need to help lift people out of energy poverty. These vulnerable communities have done the least to create the climate crisis, but they're already suffering its worst impacts. And the global north, which has caused the climate crisis, has for years promised to get funding to countries like mine to help them secure clean, affordable, and reliable energy. Where is that money? Show us that money. It is being offered late and in the form of loans with eye-wateringly high interest rates. More profit on top of mountains of profit for the global north. More debt on top of mountains of debt for the global south. The world needs a plan for global cooperation to stop the expansion of fossil fuels and to begin to fairly phase out the extraction of coal, oil, and gas. And it needs to start now today, right here in Stockholm. Enough of 50 years of superficial summits. Enough of 50 years of broken promises. Enough of 50 years of delay and deception and cowardly political leadership. Let's not just make the environment a pressing global issue. Let's do something about it.
Wow, fantastic. And I'm so glad that you raised the issue of the finance. We talked this morning in the policymakers' breakfast also about the need to end the finance to fossil fuels, but also the critical issues of funding renewable energy. You know, we've been hearing a lot, and it's good that we're hearing a lot about energy access and energy poverty, but we're also seeing the fossil fuel industry use that as a justification for more expansion. And I think it is important to note that when we look at globally all of the new oil and gas expansion and the new projects that are being proposed right now, over 75% of those are in North America, the majority in the United States. And so, you know, yes, we need to ensure greater access to energy. We need to address equity, but that's why we need a plan where the wealthy countries need to act first. I hope that you all will all join us at the Fossil Fuel Treaty in working to amplify the messages of these incredible youth leaders, but more than that, to not leave the activism to the youth. We all need to be marching, we all need to be speaking out and organizing so that the youth might have more time to be youth. And as part of this panel this morning, we also have a video message from Asa Larson Blind, who is the Vice President of the Saami Council, which works to protect Saami cultural, political, economic, civil, social, and spiritual rights and interests.
Dear friends, I'm glad to greet you all at this pre-summit to the Stockholm+50, addressing the importance of a just transition. As Sami, the healthy natural ecosystems are the basis of our culture, since they give us the possibilities to sustain ourselves on our lands through our traditional livelihoods. As an indigenous people, the access to our lands, in a reindeer herding perspective, access to pasture lands, is a prerequisite for the continuation of our culture. Our priorities are thus to advocate for the needed urgent climate action that addresses the root causes and drivers of climate change. Nothing else will help us secure the natural ecosystems that we depend on. And actions taken need to be designed and carried out in a just and equitable way, securing human rights standards on all levels. Indigenous knowledge is an important key to finding the solutions that the world needs for a sustainable future. Indigenous knowledge holders of indigenous peoples all over the world have so much to contribute with. We need to broaden the climate discussion, not only letting it be about industry and energy within the business sector. We need to talk about what it really means to transform a society. We need to question the foundations, the economical structures currently in place, that is actually what have put us in the climate crisis in the first place. Going forward, we need to discuss on what foundation we build a sustainable society and how to secure a just transition towards that society. Today's summit is a good initiative to constructively discuss solutions for the future, and I wish you all the best for your important discussions during this summit. Olo gitu. Thank you.
So I want to thank Vanessa, Elizabeth, and much gratitude for the videos from the Honorable Bob Loughman, Prime Minister of Vanuatu, and Asa Larson Blind, the Vice President of the Saami Council, for opening up this day for us. I want to give you just a little sense of the flow of the day. So we now move into parallel sessions. Over the day, we will have 2 segments of parallel sessions, so 4 sessions. In this room now, there is a panel entitled Fossil Fuels are a Weapon of Mass Destruction, with feminist experts on how oil, gas, and coal are fueling war, the climate crisis, and environmental degradation, and how groups are organizing globally. There are detailed agendas outside if you haven't picked one up, if you like to have a paper agenda in your hand, or maybe that's just those of us who are really old school, I don't know. But all the speakers are listed there. So upstairs, we will have a concurrent panel, Fossil Fuels are a Top Threat to the Healthy Planet, which will highlight the deadly human and planetary risks associated with oil, gas, and coal, and efforts to phase them out. After those concurrent sessions, we will have a break for lunch, which will be set up right out here, and 40 minutes for lunch, so hopefully you'll have time to meet each other and network and have some conversations. At that point, at 1:30, we'll come back into this room for a debrief of the morning and also to set up the 2 panels for this afternoon. And again, in the afternoon, you will have a choice between 2 panels. Then, after those 2 panels, we're going to come back. And the 2 panels this afternoon, just so you can think about your choices, are how coal, oil, and gas risk our relationship with nature, which will include Indigenous leaders sharing thoughts on how Indigenous knowledge must inform climate policies and climate justice work. And then upstairs this afternoon, we will have a conversation focused on how international cooperation on fossil fuels can fast-track a just transition. So including financing a transition and rethinking the extractive economic development model within a justice lens. So then we come back into plenary, and I'll give a short summary in real time of what happened in those concurrent sessions. And then we'll move to a discussion with youth who will share their climate change stories and cover the demands they have for Stockholm+50. And then in our final session, we'll have what's called lightning pitches. What's next? How we get to a fossil-free future from a number of speakers on their ideas of a pathway and a plan forward. And then finally, we'll have concluding remarks from Alex Rafalowitz, the director of the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, as well as Mary Moano-Kolio from the Pacific Climate Warriors. Tonight, we are hosting a reception right afterwards, right outside this room, but just for a half an hour, because we're hoping that many of you will engage in an advocacy effort happening here in Stockholm+50. There is a demonstration today from 6 to 8 p.m. at Sergels Torg. Sorry, my Swedish friends, I'm sure I've butchered that. The City Center from 6 to 8 p.m. I'll be there, along with my colleagues from the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, and it would be wonderful if you could join as well. At 8 p.m., we're hosting a social at the Capitol Rooftop Bar in the Scandic Continental Hotel, so we can have more time to meet each other and plan for our organizing together. And other quick notes. Every member of the Fossil Fuel Treaty team has a dot on their name tag, so you can ask us for assistance, learn more about how to engage in the campaign, and most importantly, give us your ideas of what you'd like to see this initiative do and what you think is integral to be included in a fossil fuel treaty. Today, we're fortunate to have simultaneous Spanish-English interpretation for all of the sessions in this plenary room. Please leave the headsets on your chair on the back table whenever you leave this room. And for Spanish-speaking guests who would like to participate in the parallel sessions upstairs, we also have mobile sets that you can collect on the table in the back. So now, I invite you to join either for the Fossil Fuels and Peace panel, which will be in this room, or to go upstairs to catch the panel on fossil fuels and public health. The rooms for concurrent sessions do have limited space. If you find the session you want to attend is full, we encourage you to go to the other sessions. And we will see you all at lunch. Thank you very much.